40 years since a team has won a game running that few times in a game. I mean, passing that few times. Is that embarrassing?
I mean, what kind
Boy,
of question?
what are we doing, bro?
What kind of question is that?
That's funny. Well, we'll remember that. This goes in this respect. It's all about respect. I come here every single week and I answer your questions truthfully, honestly. I appreciate you guys. Don't do that. Don't do that.
I think the one thing I can say to this media, because this media gets kind of up sometimes when it comes to me, we don't have our full roster. Y'all know we don't have our full roster. Stop asking me stupid questions about if I feel like I can do something. If I had my roster like they did, then I feel like I can do whatever I want to do.
Russ ended it on the bench. I was curious if you guys had a reaction to that. I don't think we've seen that in a close game this year. And how was Russ after the game? Is that the sort of thing that bothers him?
Would you think that would bother Russ not being in the game? You should coach yourself. Yeah. You guys want to quote us all the time, coach yourself. All right. Thank you. I'm going to the movies with my wife, man. I gotta go.
Regular viewers of this show know that not a week, maybe not even a day goes by when Michael and I do not quote John Sawatsky. John Sawatsky changed my life, changed my career. And I think I speak for a lot of people. I am a disciple of John Sawatsky. I have preached John Sawatsky's gospel when it comes to interviewing to Michael Holley. I have taught a class for a semester at Marist College based on John Sawatsky's principle. And John is kind enough to join us. Investigative reporter, author, instructor, and interview scientist is here to help us nerd out. So this tape should be sent to journalism classes everywhere because John is about to put some knowledge down. John, thank you so much for being here. One of our biggest arguments that Michael and I had was after that first soundbite post Bills Patriots game when the reporter asked, Jerry Sullivan, I believe it was, asked the Bills if they were embarrassed by the Patriots running over them and not throwing the ball in a win in the freezing cold. And Michael and I went at it the next day because that trigger word of embarrassed, John, triggered me. And I was like, they reacted the way they should have because that was a loaded question. Mm-hmm. Michael and others said, no, the players should have acted more professionally in response. They didn't have to go about it that way. So, John, can you explain what was wrong with that question from the reporter?
Before you answer that, John, that's a mistake, Michael Smith. You said what was wrong, and that is an opinion that you have put into a question to John Sawatsky, and that is Sawatsky 101.
My bad. That wasn't lean. That wasn't lean at all. Okay, wait, I'm sorry. Open-ended, neutral, and lean. I'm sorry. Okay. John, what did you think about Jerry Sullivan's question to Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer?
It was an embarrassing question.
Thank you.
And Michael, your question wasn't neutral, that is true, but it was less egregious than the other Michael's question. So we're talking about degree. In fact, it's pretty hard to ask a question that is neutral. Just try it sometime. And it's not that easy. But some of the stuff that has been going on in terms of the questions being asked have been real doozers, and it just goes to show that a lot of journalists don't think about their questions. They just throw them out, and they don't realize the questions contain content that people react to, And when you look at it simply as a matter of like corporate goals, if you're a corporation, you're trying to get something done, you have goals and you want to clear away as many of the obstacles as you possibly can that'll disrupt those goals. Well, the same thing happens with questions. We have a reason for asking a question. We want to get something when we ask a question, and there's so many different ways we can screw it up, and we do, and that's part of the problem. The thing about questions is that they're very powerful, but they're also very fragile. They disrupt very quickly. I always think of them in terms of being the peregrine falcon. The peregrine falcon is the most powerful bird in the sky. It has no flying enemies. It has all the food it wants. It's the fastest bird in the sky, and yet it almost became extinct and half of North America, and they had to put it on the endangered species list. Why is that? Because they're very powerful, but they're also very fragile. And DDT got into its reproductive system, and they couldn't. The shells on their eggs were too thin to hatch, so they couldn't reproduce. Questions are the same thing. They're powerful, but they're fragile, and we have to use them more precisely. As journalists, we're professionals. We need to know how to ask questions professionally. And that's what I've gone around teaching journalists to do, how to ask questions professionally in a way that gets results.
I know Michael wants to ask you some open-ended, neutral and lean questions, but I really would love it if you. Yeah. What's the line, John? I know the line, but I like it better when you say it. I could recite it about questions as window panes.
Oh, well, I see them as windows. I mean, what's the purpose of having a window is so you can see outside, right? And so you want clean windows, and you want windows that are free of defects, no cracks, no bubbles, because the whole purpose of that window is to give you a sense of reality that is outside. And so when we ask a question, we want to get from the person, from the respondent, a picture of reality of what is going on in their life. And so we don't want to ask questions that are dirty, that are biased, that have filth on them, that are cracked, anything that distorts the view. We want to get a clear view about reality that is going on. Because in the end, that's what we're trying to do as journalists. We're trying to convey reality to our audience.
Now, I was going to ask you about Buffalo, but I want to move on. I was going to ask you about Jerry Sullivan and the approach he could have used in that situation that would have elicited what he was looking for. But we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm more interested in the next clip. We had Penny Hardaway, and I think about his response, and I even think about an old clip from Dennis Green. Say, yeah, you want to crown him? Then go ahead and crown them. The Bears are who we thought they were. And those are guys just bringing emotion. And yes, the questions weren't necessarily great, but I guess the counter to the clean windows is, well, maybe the question wasn't great, but the content is so memorable that we're still talking about it. Aren't we still trying to get to that content, even though it wasn't delivered via a clean question?
You make a really good point. And here's the thing. I mean, there's no rules, but there are principles. And these principles, they're universal and they're timeless, But there always are exceptions, and it's like anything else. I come from an economics background, and where the law of supply, I learned the law of supply, my first lecture I ever took in university. And the law of supply, the law of supply and demand absolutely applies, but there are exceptions. And sometimes when you increase the price of something, it goes up. The demand goes up rather than down, and that is true. There's always exceptions, but if you follow those exceptions and use that as your guide, you're going to run into trouble. And that's the same thing with interviewing. So once in a while, you'll throw a trigger word in there, and it'll get them to react, and they'll supply emotion, and it'll be a great clip. Playoffs? You think playoffs? We're just lucky to win a game. And we've all heard that one often enough. And but those are exceptions. And if you devise an interview methodology based on exceptions, you're going to be a bad interviewer. And you're going to get into the case that some programs get into, where they interview. I call it interviewing by exception. They ask bad question after bad question after bad question, and they keep taping till they get enough exceptions. They can string together a series of answers that can get onto the air. It's a very inefficient, bad way to conduct an interview. So rather than interview by exception, you should interview by example.
Yeah, no, one of the things I'm fond of saying when it comes to, because people will say, well, and Michael and I talked about that. Well, they got a great response, or they got what they were looking for. I'm like, the reason why people don't realize that they don't know how to interview is because they don't know what they could have gotten had they asked
Exactly.
a more effective question. Like, you think
The
you got
opportunity
something
cost.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
What is
yeah,
the
you could-
opportunity cost? You know, and what some of my most effective sessions I've had, you know, when I was working at ESPN, was after I sit down. Michael, you took my course for 3 days, and then at the end of it, I'd sit down individually with people and go over their tape. And so often they'd say, "Oh," and I'd show, "Okay, here's what you gave up. If you asked the question this way, look at the possibilities you would have had." And they go, "Oh man, okay, now I see it. Now the penny drops." You say, "You have to. What did you give up in order to get that?" That's the bottom line.
Ooh, John, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Present company excluded. Present company excluded in the sports realm and outside of sports. Who do you think, who are some of your favorite interviewers working today? Just give us
Present
like
company
3 or
excluded,
4.
yeah.
Oh, I
present
hate
company
that question. If there's any
I
question,
know.
you could
It's so
ask.
unfair, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's because most people interview badly, you know, and most journalists are bad interviewers, you know, and that's because
That hurts, but you know, it's true. It's true.
they you know, see, when you're talking about communication, there's 2 elements to it. There's output and there's input, right? Those are the only 2 things when you communicate with somebody, whether it's through an interview or a conversation or anything else. It's always intake and output and input, you know, and of course in journalism we've all focused on the outputting skills, and those are you have to be a good outputter to get on television. You have to, you know, and those are the people who tend to rise to the top, but those are also the people who do the worst interviews, because interviewing is not about giving, it's about getting. See, and all the principles are reversed. All your instincts are exactly the opposite, you know. And it's like being a basketball player and learning only offense and not defense, you know. It's like being a baseball player and learning only how to hit and never working on your glove skills, you know, fielding skills. And you're going to be a one-way player and you'll never be a superstar. You need to be a star in both dimensions, output and input. Just like in sports, you have to be a star in offense and defense. Yep.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you, because I took your seminar in 2006. I think it was 2006. And by that time, you know, I'm young, hot shot. You couldn't tell me I didn't know how to interview. And then I took your class. I was like, oh my God. But it's like with so many people have just been doing it for a certain way for so long, and it works. They don't know to do any better. But what I'm curious about, John, I know you always talk about how your methodology is constantly evolving. You're constantly learning yourself. Even since I first met you, and we've kept in touch over the years, and I first took your class, and you know, my paradigm shifted from learning from you. The landscape of media has changed. There are so many podcasts, and podcasts being hosted by non-traditional journalists. I mean, a lot of athletes, a lot of celebrities, a lot of influencers, if you will, are in media now. The formats have changed. The platforms have evolved and changed from the days when we were discussing sideline reporting or your traditional sit-down interview, one-on-one, those type, or you know, exclusive interviews, that sort of thing. There's so many different opportunities for interaction. What do you think of some of let me see if I can phrase this differently. Trying to make sure I ask this the right way. Since I'm in front of you, I want to get it right. I got to get it right. Since I'm in front of you, I don't. How would you adapt your principles to fit the changing media landscape?
Well, the principles don't change. I mean, they're timeless. You know, you're still trying to do basically the same thing. You're storytelling. You know, if you're in journalism, essentially you're into storytelling. Even people on breaking news, the hard news reporters, you know, their things change a little bit, but your storytelling, And it becomes a matter of how do you get that story across to your audience? Who is the storyteller? And who's the storyteller talking to? Are you the storyteller talking to your audience, or are you interviewing somebody when the person you're interviewing becomes the storyteller and they're talking to you? And that's where the application changes. But in terms of, because somebody is new in a new podcast or something, that doesn't change at all. In fact, they have a bit of an advantage because they haven't learned all the bad skills that professional journalists have picked up. I remember many, many, many years ago when I started as a newspaper reporter, some of the best interviews I ever did were some of the first interviews I ever did, and then what happened, I became skillful. And after a while, my interviews weren't as effective as they were at the beginning, this rookie luck thing. And that's not a coincidence. You see, what happens is I learned more. I got opinionated, and I started jumping to conclusions, you see. And rather than starting at the beginning, and finding out what really was going on, I'd make certain leaps and certain assumptions. And I knew so much, I didn't have to ask what some people would regard as a dumb question. Well, why is that?
Right.
Those very simple
Those are the best
questions. Those are the best
those are the
questions.
best ones. Yeah.
And those are the basic ones that get out the essential story. And I was actually jumping ahead of that process, and I was screwing up the process. So some of the people that are not traditional journalists that are in podcasts, they can be doing some actually pretty good stuff because they haven't learned enough to screw it up yet.
I love it.
Yeah. My final question for you, John, is how do Mike and I get better as interviewers?
Well, in sports, what do coaches and athletes do? They study tape, right? They study tape. I was just reading a feature on Cooper Kupp, who you could argue should be the MVP of the year. He's not the fastest.
Okay, John with the take. Okay, John with the sports take. Okay.
Like it. There it is. There it is.
Slide that in there.
And this is coming from a Seahawks fan who is not a Rams fan. But I have to give Cooper Kupp his due. He's not the fastest. He's not the biggest. But he's the guy who always does it in the end. You see. And what does he do? He studies tape. He keeps and this is the thing we have to do. Go back and study the questions. What was interesting when I used to teach a lot in Europe, and these are all in the Nordic countries: Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland. These countries, Netherlands. None of them operated in English, although they all spoke English very well. And of course, I was teaching them in English. And I was teaching them off their tape, which was in Swedish or Norwegian or something. And I would have them when we did tape analysis session. Of course, I don't know a word of Swedish, and they would play the tape and stop it and translate, and then they'd play another sentence and translate for me. You know what? And half the time I didn't have to say anything. They'd play a sentence, they'd translate, they say, "Oh, okay, I know what the problem is." You don't have to say anything, And because forcing them to go through that, they realize, oh, well, this is, like we're running at full speed, not slow-mo. And when we're looking at ourselves, and this was slowing them down, and they were looking at every word, and it became obvious what the problem was,
Yeah.
So I just give you my Cooper Kupp example. Just go back and study tape,
Study the tape.
Yeah. Hey, John, this has been fantastic. This has been fantastic. Again, it feels full circle. I mean, people who listen to us, us name drop you all the time. I got to make a confession on the way out. I break your rules all the time, but I know I'm breaking them. I'm just getting a little too much into my output, but I know what I'm doing. I haven't forgotten them. I'm in output mode as much as input mode. But when I want to, I lock in. And for those that don't know, they're also good with your significant others, and they're good for applicants and job interviews. They're good in every walk of life. It's not just journalism.
Absolutely. Oh, no,
They're
no.
great.
This has universal application. Yeah.
Universal application. God bless you, John. Thank you so much for everything.
There it is.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
John.
It's been a blast.
All right,
Take care.
Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.